Welcome back. Today we're focusing on ways to improve the use of forage in a cattle operation. Before the break, we talked about tall fescue. Now let's focus on another big challenge, and that's what to do when you're dealing with dry conditions that slow your grass production and magnify your weed challenges. With us once again are Dave Owens and Pat Birch with Dow AgriSciences, as well as ranchers Lane Lightsey of Florida and Glenn Rao of Iowa. Dave, you know, most of the country has come out of these terrible drought conditions, but in some cases drought does persist. And specifically, what challenges does that create from a weed standpoint?
Well, one of the things that happens in a drought is you tend to overutilize your perennial grasses, and it really puts them in quite a bit of a stress. Their root systems shrink down a little bit, their carbohydrate reserves are depleted, and just like you or I, when we've overexerted ourselves and we don't have a lot of energy, they don't have a lot of energy to recover. As a result, the weeds and the brush take advantage of that, and they come in and they compete very well following those dry conditions. So you get a little moisture, following a little bit of drought, you're going to have weed and brush problems.
Glenn, what would you add?
Well, anytime our pastures are stressed, whether it's too much rain or too little rain or anything, it stresses our livestock. And so we like to even that out as much as we can. We try to rotate a little oftener and keep the weed suppression down as much as we can, so we have as much grass as we can for the cattle.
And Lane, when you're coming out of a drought, what are some keys to quick pasture recovery?
Well, probably one of the main things is get rid of your weeds before you go into a drought. Weeds become very difficult to kill when they're dormant. So we do our weed spraying late winter, early spring. We've already sprayed. Here it is still in March, and we've just about finished up our weed application. We've been using Graze On Next and Pasture Guard, and it's done an excellent job. You can look at these pastures here, and there are no weeds, and you won't see any. It's already killed them when they're, and plus we get by with a much lower rate too doing it early.
Pat, any additional advice?
Well, I think that their model is really the ideal situation. Many times we're coming out of a drought and we may not have that good first step was to prepare and be ready with good weed management, so your forages are devoted to your desirable forage species. So in that case, you're going to have to attack those weed problems and devote more of those resources available to the forage.
And Dave, as we think about management flexibility, what can growing more forage on rangeland like this mean to producers?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, it really gives you a lot of flexibility. If you want to keep those calves a little bit longer, put a little bit more weight on them before you take to market, you've got the capabilities to do that. If you want to stockpile a little bit of forage for later on in the season, you can do that. And then also, if you get into a real train wreck, if it gets unbelievably dry, you can keep your genetics on your ranch. So those are all key things that extra forage will do for you.
Glenn and Lane, I want to ask you specifically in your own operation, Glenn, what does having ample forage resources mean to you?
Well, it means it's easier to keep the cows in a good body score condition. It helps with your conception rates. It just makes everything a lot easier if you have plenty of forage. And it's a goal for us to always have more than what we need. And that doesn't always work out, but when you're fighting Mother Nature, you got to use as many advantages as you can.
And Lane, what does the value of forage production mean to Lightsey cattle here?
Well, we want to maintain our forage at a level where we get our most good out of it. Where we're at right now, the forage area coming out of winter, and it's grazed about where we want it to. It's short, but it's going to start growing here when we get a few warm days. But the opposite is a problem too. If we let our grasses get up too rank, then we lose some food value too. So we have to maintain those grasses at the right level. We're getting the optimal good out of them.
So you mentioned a couple things. You've talked a little bit about weed control and fertilizer and stuff. What else do you do to maximize forage production here in Florida?
Well, we do pasture rotation to some degree. We actually we still have some native woods in Florida, so if we do get short on some of our improved pastures, we can move cows in the native woods, especially when it's dry, because a lot of the what we call wet weather ponds dry up, and they have pretty good feed in at certain times of the year. And then there's some byproducts that we feed that do help too.
And Glenn, how about you in Iowa? What are the kinds of things you and Bev have implemented to maximize forage production?
Well, we've piped in some water, rural water, back into some places that cows normally wouldn't graze, and they can utilize that pasture a little better. We also have divided up into smaller paddocks so we can use the paddocks and give the grass a rest. We found that the resting period is the best thing that happens to the grass. So if we can do some things like that, it just extends our grazing period as long as we can.
Well, thanks, gentlemen, so much for your insights. We appreciate that. And remember, if you'd like more information about any of our discussion topics today, you can visit the website rangeandpasture.com.